morning, everybody. It's Friday. It's 10:30, and this is CEO Chat with my buddy Joe Asamendi.
Hey, nice to see you.
And
You're
it's
El
always
Cini?
I am El Cini. Thank you for saying that.
Well,
I appreciate
you're
that. Our program, as always, is brought to you by Hiram and Solomon Cigars, which is hiramandsolomon.com. Terrific tobacco products for cigar smokers or the cigar smoker in your life, including your personal favorite, which is their Veiled Prophet.
Absolutely.
Which is a great name for a cigar, and also potentially a great name for a human being. Who knows?
There you go. Yeah, right,
but
exactly.
Anyway, that's hiramandsolomon.com.
What's more important is our guest.
We have a terrific guest. Now listen, we always try to get good people on the program. We really do. But the really best guests are the ones with the provocative, interesting, different ideas.
Absolutely.
Cristina DiGiacomo of More Alchemy, and the website is morealchemy.com.
Hello.
Cristina, thank you for coming all the way down from New York for our program.
Yes.
And let me kind of tee this up, because what you do is so different from your typical business coach. You take revered and time-tested philosophies and use them to inspire people to live the brand of the organization that they serve. Is that right?
That's correct. I'm a philosopher of achievement.
A philosopher. Now, philosophy was a class you cut in college, and me too. But I mean, that was a lot of people really have the wrong idea about that. So why don't we start with explaining to everybody that philosophy really is a practical philosophy of how to live a life. Maybe you can talk about that.
Sure. The simplest way to explain it is philosophy was self-help before the term self-help came along.
Okay.
So, for thousands of years, people turned to philosophy as a way to understand how to engage with the world. And so that's all philosophy is it's a protocol for engaging with the world. And some people have this notion that it's very academic and very theoretical, but philosophy actually can be very vibrant, and it's really about leading a really good life. And there's all these wonderful, great minds that have presented to us all of these wonderful ways of being and of living, and all I've done is study it and understand it, and now I'm using it to apply it to the working world to help people engage with their work.
That was really well put and interesting, because you don't get to hear that very often. I mean, most people, most coaches take a kind of a more prosaic, more literal approach to things, but you take that philosophical approach you take, I think actually makes it very sticky and makes it very effective. So what kind of outcomes do you get when you approach people this way?
Yeah, so one thing I want to say to that is there's a different feeling. The sort of intellectual, mental, emotional door opens when Socrates is in the room.
Right, sure.
Right, so when I'm working with a client, it becomes about talking about what this concept is or this idea is as a proxy for them to talk about their issues and their challenges. So then it just becomes about talking about philosophy and not necessarily, forcing them or putting them in a situation where they're feeling a bit challenged and talking about what's going on with them. And so the outcome is usually a more open conversation, and that leads to them being able to apply these principles and practices in their own work to see what's going on with them. So they get to actually observe themselves mastering their environment, mastering their thoughts, thinking about ideas. I know that for people that I've worked with, they've become more creative, more collaborative, more resilient, more adaptable. All the things that anyone would want to be or even have their team be is really all coming from a place of wisdom. Wisdom is the ultimate soft skill.
That place of wisdom, which is a phrase I know you use quite a bit, and that the ultimate soft skill really is being grown up.
Yes.
Meaning understanding, being mature, and understanding that there is always a better way to do things, and that you're always on a search for that. What I like about it is that what lines up with some of the stuff that we've done is that what Cristina does is she creates a kind of a role model for an organization, but she uses philosophy to craft that role model. So in a sense, it's what would Jesus do, but only instead of Jesus, it's Socrates or Plato or Aristotle.
Or Emerson. Or Lao Tzu. I mean, I bring in Eastern, Western traditions, Indian traditions, Renaissance Italian philosophy. I mean, it's so vast. And the beauty of that is I can take any sort of situation or challenge and then curate specific philosophies and philosophers that can address that particular challenge.
And that gets us into the process, because before the program we had a chance to talk about that a little bit. So when you work with somebody, you try to understand how they perceive the challenges in their work life, whatever that might be. And that conversation leads to you curating the appropriate body of philosophical wisdom to help them overcome those challenges. Do I have that right?
Yes, it's really, you go through a discovery phase. You do the thing that philosophers do best. You ask questions.
Right.
Questions are always the best way to begin anything. So you find out what's going on, and it's really very simple. And so from there, I then decide, and we work together, we co-create an action plan to figure out what would be the best outcome. And then I just go and I find the philosophies, and I find very easily accessible and easy to relate ideas and concepts and material, and then we sit down and we talk about it, and then I ask them to practice. So I'll put together an actual active learning practice that they can go and apply, and then we reconvene and talk about their observations, because awareness is really the first part of change anyway, and that's really built into my process.
What triggered your interest in this? This is very interesting.
Sure. Well, I was, I have a 20-year career in advertising and marketing, and as an employee and as a manager. And at some point, I really felt like I was in a grind, and I wanted to do something different.
Okay.
So I thought, well, I've always been kind of interested in philosophy, and there were adult education courses around philosophy. So I started to take these courses. And at the same time, I was feeling really stressed out at work and kind of struggling. And I started to put 2 and 2 together, and I started to apply what I was learning in these philosophy classes in how I approached my work, in how I managed people, and all of a sudden I just started to feel a little bit less stressed. I started to feel like I had ideas. I actually had a big idea that I can share with you, but overall I just started to feel better, and that's where it kind of started in terms of...
So you were your own first client.
I really was.
Yeah, that is an interesting way really to come
at
this. And I mean, that's how you know it works, because it worked for you. And when you're so busy working inside your business, doing the day-to-day, you can forget that there's a higher purpose that you serve when you work in your business. And what I like about the way you approach this is you pull people out of what they're trapped in and give them a chance to look at it in a fresh way, so that the next time they tackle it more effectively.
That's exactly what I do.
Yeah, and that is, I think now your background, you've got a history.
Yes.
And you said 20 years, and it's, I mean, somebody who looks as young as you, it's hard to imagine.
Thank you.
20
Started
years.
when you were 12.
Definitely. But part of the work that you've done, and part of what led you here, was some branding work you did for the New York Times.
Yes, actually, talking about that, I was my first client. I was at the New York Times, and I was a marketing manager, and that was fine. But I had this idea, because at the time, when I was there, no one was really talking about brand. The idea or the competency hadn't really been built. So I had this idea, but I was just this lowly marketing manager. I didn't really have any clout within the organization, but I just had this idea. And so I decided to go to the executives and say, look, I think we really need to build the brand competency and to really have the New York Times stand for something and talk about what it stands for. So it turned out that my boss really liked the idea, and she said, okay, well, if this is your idea, then you go ahead and do it.
Okay, wow.
Great.
So I came up with the idea for what the mission of brand was for the New York Times, and I built out, the idea for a department, and I had some staff, and then I, really kind of laddered it up and moved it up the chain. But overall, the whole thing became a department that then eventually was the department that created the Truth campaign for the New York Times, which ran in the 2016 election and garnered the New York Times about 2.5 million digital subscribers.
Really?
So beyond this just being a brand story, this is also really a philosophy story.
It is.
Because at the time I was practicing and understanding Plato's allegory of the cave. I was practicing stoicism. I was practicing all these things that helped me mentally even have the idea in the first place. Have the wherewithal to have these clear conversations with leadership, have the vision and the idea, and to figure out what was really needed and what was appropriate, and then to be able to execute on it. All of that was because I was practicing philosophy.
And that was it.
And that was it.
And yet what I like about the approach is that instead of just sort of concentrating on a brand as something you represent with a logo, graphics, what you really do is come up with a system that encourages and inspires people to live the brand of the organization that they're a part of. That whole truth campaign idea, I mean, that who are we at our core at the New York Times? And I want to make connections for people who are watching the program. If you're a client out there who's frustrated that you're not growing quickly enough, you know, a business owner or a business consultant who'd like to incorporate this approach in the way you do your work.
Department manager?
Department manager inside of a company, and the way it kind of transpired at the New York Times. And you ought to give Cristina a call. A little later on, she'll give you some contact information you can use to do that.
How did your coworkers receive this? What was their reception?
So here's what's interesting. No one actually knew.
At the New York Times, by the way.
Right.
No one actually knew that I was, if your question is around if they knew I was practicing, no one actually knew. So I was able to observe the effect of this.
Oh, okay.
Just as, like this was just me naturally going through the process of the work.
All right.
And it just was only after everything went really well and I was in this new role and I was embodying this new role. I mean, I did have my direct report tell me that I was the best boss that she ever had, which I think is a pretty serious accolade and not something most people get. You know,
don't say that.
Most people don't ever have a best boss.
Yeah. No.
So clearly I was doing something right because I was managing through principles and values and managing my mind as well. And I think that had a really positive
Instead of
effect.
just going down the list of things that you need to do today and how come you haven't gotten this done yet, which is what most people think management is. There's an inspiration component to management that you borrow philosophy in order to kind of inspire people. And I think that is so wonderful and so transformative. And we need to take a break. But when we come back after this break, we want to talk more about the engagement model, how you work with the client, and talk about work you're planning to begin doing with teams, because this sounds like a perfect play for that. And you're writing a book. We'll talk about the book too. So
thank you.
There we go.
We'll be back with more CEO chat and Joe Asamendi.
There you go.
And Cristina DiGiacomo after these messages.
Stick around. Well, we're back.
We are. We're back with more CEO chat.
Yeah.
My name is Elsie.
I'm still Joe Asamendi.
And this is Cristina DiGiacomo.
Right.
Wonderful
Hey, Cristina.
guest. And we're still brought to you by HiremanSolomonCigars.com.
Absolutely.
So, definitely take a look at their website, check out their products. But Cristina, before the program, we learned that you have this very unique approach to business counseling, business coaching. It's more than coaching, it's leading. It's a business leadership kind of a paradigm is really what you're creating. It's very different. And you borrow from proven, time-tested, philosophical thought in order to create this transformative experience for customers. It's very interesting, very unique. So how would that process start with us? You mentioned that there's I know that somebody can call you just to get to know you, and there's no charge. The meter doesn't start running until there's an agreement.
Correct.
But what do you need to know from somebody before you know how you can help them?
Well, it really just starts with one question, which is, how's work going?
Okay.
And usually, I just let the person kind of let me know what's happening. But we do talk about, you know, what the challenges are, what the tribulations are, and maybe things that might be working, things that are feeling right, that are feeling good. But sometimes I'll ask questions like, when was the last time you remember making a decision? Or what kind of thoughts are you actually having about the work, and how much time do you spend just having thoughts about the work? And you know, things like, do you find yourself having lots and lots and lots of ideas, but maybe having a hard time executing them? You know, what are you experiencing or perceiving as the relationships that you have at work? Where do you think you stand with other people? So it's really kind of digging into what they see as their working dynamic, and all the kinds of questions that the ones that I just shared with you kind of help surface that. But essentially what I'm trying to do is assess how much they are already in their own head about what's going on with them.
Got it. And
How long does
then
engagement last?
So typically it's around 2 months.
Okay.
But you know, I have clients that have put me on retainer, so we've worked together for a couple of
continue to work
months,
with them.
and then they just can, you know, have me stay on as they continue with their work, but they have me as an advisor. But typically it takes about 2 months to address anything that might be going on. And also, it's not just about the challenges, it's also about amplifying what's going
what's working?
well.
What's working? How do
Because
we do more of that?
Exactly,
Sure.
because typically what tends to happen is when there's an idea of how to expand on something that's working well, all the things that don't feel right tend to fall away.
Sure.
So that's another aspect of the work.
I think, and so this initial conversation that we have ultimately leads to a proposal that you provide to me that includes curated philosophical ideas
That's correct.
that will inspire me and potentially the other members of my team to work in a more effective way toward whatever common goals we might be sharing. Now let's talk a little bit about teams, because that's a change up. I know that individual business coaching and counseling is important, but also teams. How would you work with a team, with a group of people?
So it would be a bit of a similar process in terms of understanding what's going on, but now we're talking in a more collective sense. And the beauty of doing this in a group is because then the group gets to move together. The group then gets to understand and talk about and have a conversation around these concepts and ideas. So still understanding what, you know, if a group needs to grow, or maybe they've suffered a setback. Maybe the morale might be low, or perhaps there's an internal dynamic, maybe there's friction or tension, or maybe there's an issue with retention or productivity. Whatever those things are, then I develop some principles and concepts and practices around addressing those things. But the group learns it together. So then we would have sort of a group session where I would then present a concept like, for example, Lao Tzu's non-action would be a really, really great philosophy for a team that may have been in a grind for a really long time and they're burning out. So we would talk about what that means, and the group and everyone gets to contribute their own perspective around that idea, and then they would go and practice it. And then they would reconvene and share their observations collectively of what they experienced with that particular practice. And it really brings people together, but it also showcases diverse thinking amongst the group. So people may have a different angle on a particular concept that could be illuminating for even management to understand, like, wow, I had no idea that this is what my team member actually thought about what was going on. So it's just a more expanded view, but it also brings together the dynamics of a collective into
What I
this.
love about that is it gives people on a team who know each other because they work together a completely different view of each other. And in a way, what you're really doing is connecting the heart and soul of all these people on this team in a much tighter way than just through the context of the work they actually do on a day-to-day basis. And that is a great formula, a great recipe for shifting people's negative attitudes in a more positive direction. You start moving forward when you do something like that. And all of this is going to be in a book that you're currently writing. So why don't we talk about Wise Up a little bit?
Is that the name of the book? Wise Up?
My book is called Wise Up at Work.
Yeah, cool.
Yes. So,
what are you writing about?
so what I've done is created, basically the book is just a primer. You know, there's hundreds of principles and hundreds of practices, and I've been doing this for 9 years. And what I discovered was really essentially 4 things that any manager or leader or individual who might be struggling with their work can read, understand, and apply right away in a very relatable way. And I have principles and philosophies around having more clarity, increasing the quality of your thinking, around deliberation, so being able to actually deliberate and be more decisive, and to act. So it's not just about thinking, it's about acting. It's about acting. Everything feeds into the acting part. So so really this book is just an introduction to this kind of work. But
This whole concept of
this
philosophy.
whole concept of philosophy for the workplace. Ancient wisdom for the modern workplace.
And you've written in classical Greek, I think. Is that right? And so we need to learn how to
Yes.
It's written in very plain English, which I think is important.
There's a Latin translation, a Sanskrit translation, all the ancient
Well,
languages.
you've taken all those things that people are generally afraid of, and you've made them relatable and approachable and relevant to the kind of work that we do in the 21st century. And I think that is such an accomplishment. You should be really proud of that work.
Thank you.
You know what I find so interesting is people look at philosophy as something that they can't really grasp. You know, it's kind of a mystic type of thing. And you bring it into the modern world, and you bring it in something that's tangible. I think it's great.
I think that is terrific. And not just 1 or 2 philosophers, but the entire breadth of philosophical thinking over the last millennia, several millennia, including some modern thinking, which is, and it's all curated. I love that word you use. It's all curated to apply to the situation that I present to you when you get to know me.
That's correct.
I think that is so unbelievably cool.
I appreciate you saying that. I really want people to understand that philosophy is so relevant, and it's not sitting on a shelf collecting dust. I'm actually really here to disrupt the notion that philosophy is inaccessible. I mean, do I look like, you know, a guy with a white beard and a toga? No, and I've also been known to have a little bit of a potty mouth, and you know, that's okay too.
That's okay too.
But you know, I really believe that if you can ask a question about your life, then you're a philosopher.
That's what makes
That's
you.
it.
And that-
Everyone can be a philosopher. If you have the capacity to ask a question about what's going on in your life, you are a philosopher. And I'm here to dispel the notion that it's in some ivory tower. And I want to make it real, and I want to make it accessible for people, and I want them to use it in their working world, because I really believe that the working world provides us with so many scenarios and situations that really test us and really impact us in so many ways. And so that's where I'm choosing to start.
Well, you can hear your passion come through. I know
Thank
this
you.
is something you love to do.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned before the program, too, that your academic experience is in organizational development. You have an advanced degree in that?
That's correct. I have a master's degree in organizational change management.
Okay.
So, you know, I have 20-year career and real world experience. I have a really good understanding of organizational change and organizational development and the mission of creating great workplaces, and this practice and study in philosophy. And I just mashed all of that up and created this industrial philosophy, which is the category that I created to just put sort of a name to the work that I'm doing.
And it inspires and guides change rather than dictates it, because people don't accept dictated change. They only accept inspired change. They learn. People like to learn. They just don't like to be told what to do. And I think I think it's wonderful you approach it that way.
Thank you. That ties to a philosophical principle, which is there's a big difference between having the knowledge of something and actually having the experience of it. Right? When someone comes to you and says, I had this experience where I was able to do this thing, and you have someone else who says, well, I know that this thing exists, who are you going to listen to?
Right.
The person who actually had the experience.
Absolutely.
And that's how it becomes, you know, really ingrained in how people go about their lives, is actually having the experience of things.
Okay, now you're also the vice president of the Organizational Development Network of New York, which
That's
is where you and I actually first met.
Yes, yes.
Maybe you could spend a minute or two talking about that.
Sure. The organization, first of all, organization development is a field around creating great workplaces and creating organizations that function well, not only for the employees, but also with the world at large. So the Organization Development Network of New York is a professional networking group of organizational development practitioners and organizational change management professionals. And so if you are in that field, come check us out. But essentially, we have programming around leadership development, employee engagement, organizational development. As a matter of fact, in April, I'm going to be hosting a panel around Agile.
Great.
And so those are the kinds of topics that we have in the kind of programming that we have.
That's great. You work with Jason Myers, who is a former guest on CEO Chat,
Yes.
somebody we talked to a couple of months ago. So it's a great organization. That's odnny.org. You know, for people who might want to become involved in that. You don't have to be in the New York area to join the organization. It's a great organization to be a member of, and it's a terrific excuse to go to New York and have a good time. So
I'm in.
I know you're always in. That's so. Where do you see all this headed for you, Christina? I mean, what's your vision of the future?
So my vision is to be able to apply all of this at the organizational level,
Okay.
where organizations are actually adopting principles and philosophies as a way to sort of create a principled organization, an organization that's built on something that's foundational, that's universal, that people can understand. And that way, they have a high level of employee engagement because it's all inherent in us. All of this knowledge and all of these disciplines and traditions are all things that we know when we hear them to be true. So imagine an organization operating from that level, not only for their customers, but also for society, for their own constituents and employees within the organization. And my hope is that if an organization is run on principle, it will be successful. And we are kind of seeing some success with organizations that are really operating on that level, such Patagonia is an excellent example, and the B Corps movement is an excellent example. And I'd love to blow that out. I mean, if you really want pie in the sky, it would be amazing to have a role inside, you know, companies like a chief philosophy officer.
Sure.
Interesting.
You know, and having an actual, like someone who really understands philosophy have an embedded role within an organization to partner with human resources and to partner with executives to really imbue the organization with values and principles.
And truth is truth, whether it's 1,000 or 2,000 years ago or something you just Googled on the internet yesterday. The truth is the truth. And I think it's such a great guiding principle for positively changing and transforming organizations. So we're at that part of the program where you get to tell everybody how to reach you personally, and your camera is the one right there that's going to focus on you. So go ahead and tell everybody how to get a hold of Cristina DiGiacomo.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your attention. Just find me on LinkedIn. Let's connect. You can also go to my website, moralchemy.com, and I look forward to meeting with you.
Cristina, what a great pleasure having you on our program. Thank you very much for joining us on CEO Chat.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And thanks all of you for tuning in. A terrific conversation. Christina's definitely somebody you want to reach out to and get to know. So go ahead and do that. And until next week, I'm Al Cini.
I'm still Joe Osamendi.
And thanks for joining. Have a great weekend.
Yeah. Be safe, sound. We'll see you next week.
Thanks very much.